This happened around 2010 when I was about 6 years old. My family and I were living in a small neighborhood in Springfield, Oregon. It was my older brother, sister, my mom, and I, as my dad was deployed at the time. I was really close with my dad and always took it hard when he was away. Late one night, I sat on the porch with my mom while she smoked a cigarette and we watched the rain. While we were sitting there cold but enjoying the rain in each other's company, we noticed a man walking in the middle of the road. He was wearing one of those oversized yellow rain jackets. It immediately caught both of our attention because it was pouring rain really late and there was no one else usually out at that hour. We sat there watching him as he began walking slightly toward our driveway. My mom stood up, grabbed my hand, put her cigarette out, and we watched as the man stopped walking right next to our garbage cans in our driveway. My mom turned to take us inside, and the man began yelling at us. I don't remember what he said, but I remember being so terrified as my mom rushed me inside. As soon as we got inside, my mom locked the door and turned off all the lights. At that point, I was terrified, and of course, being a kid, I started crying. My mom rushed my siblings and I, shushing us, and we all went and laid in my parents' king-size bed together, as we were all a bit worried. But nothing else happened. There was no more yelling or noise or anything, so we all drifted to sleep. That night, I had a terrible nightmare I can still picture to this day. It was of a man in a big yellow rain jacket peering through our window. I woke up terrified and crying, literally shaking my sister awake, just so I could tell her I was scared. I have no idea how much time passed. My sister got out of bed and walked me to the bathroom that was attached to the bedroom. She shut the door and spoke with me while I cried, trying not to wake my mom or brother. But while we were in there, we suddenly heard banging, loud banging on the front door. My sister burst out of the bathroom and started shaking my mom awake without saying anything. And naturally, my brother woke up from the sound too. I sat terrified in the bathroom while my mom motioned for my siblings to join me in there. We watched her walk out of the room toward the front door. My siblings and I were all crying, scared out of our minds, as this man was still repeatedly banging on the door. My mom must have been trying to find her old BlackBerry phone, but seemingly failed because when she came back, she didn't have it. That meant none of us could call the police since this was the only phone in the house. We sat there in silence, listening to the man who was now screaming and yelling for us to let him in, while still banging loudly on the door. It was honestly a really hopeless and fearful night. It was just the 5 of us with no phone to call the police, and my dad, who is normally our protector, was gone. We sat there on the floor huddled together, freaking out and praying our neighbors would call the police, but nothing happened. Eventually, the man left, but no police ever came. What was strange is that it was a small neighborhood where everyone lived close together, and our house specifically was a duplex. So, how not a single neighbor heard this and called the police is beyond me. Eventually, we went to sleep, and everything was okay for a while, but not even a few weeks later, still just the 5 of us at my home. My family woke up to my front door wide open, along with a window open and a huge hole cut into the window screen. My mom immediately called the police. There were lots of random items missing, including my piggy bank filled with all my holiday savings, along with random items around the house. But the most disturbing thing missing was a giant vase filled with cash and coins that my family had been saving for months. The sickening part was that it had been on my nightstand, right next to my bed, where we were all sleeping. This was a long time ago, and sadly, my mom has since passed, and my dad wasn't there when it happened. So, I'm not really sure what other details I might have missed. I do know that the intruder was never caught. I also don't know if the same man who was harassing us that night was the same person who broke into our house weeks later. It could be connected, or it could not be. I do know that none of us were harmed, which makes me feel like maybe it wasn't the same person, because that man seemed really aggressive for someone who just wanted money. But on the other hand, I later found what looked like the same giant vase, sitting on the porch of a neighbor who was a man that lived alone and that we never really saw. So honestly, who knows? This happened to me almost 3 years ago, almost to the day, while I was in Idaho serving a full-time mission. The town that me and my companion, who I'll refer to as Spencer, were assigned to was quite small, so there wasn't always a lot for us to do. And on top of this, at the time, I was going through a rough patch. Things like self-esteem issues and having trouble sleeping. So as a result, we found it difficult to stay out all day doing work. One other thing about where we were assigned was that we were living in an actual house, albeit a tiny one. Usually, we only ever get apartments, but I guess for this area, a house was the only option, probably because there were no apartments anywhere nearby. The layout of the house was fairly simple. As you walked through the front door, you entered the main room where our desks were, and immediately to your right was our bedroom. If you kept walking straight, you would walk through a large open doorway that led right into the kitchen. From there, to your right was the bathroom, and to your left was the laundry room, and that was it, besides one storage closet in the kitchen as well. One other detail was that, although the house technically stood on its own lot, the landlord's house was right next door, and anytime we had problems with something, we could just walk over or call him. On this particular night, I was sitting in the living room at my desk on my phone, with my chair turned to face the kitchen, and Spencer was sitting in the bedroom on his phone. It had gotten dark outside a couple of hours earlier, so we returned home and were just relaxing before we went to bed. In the middle of whatever I was doing, I heard a single knock come from the window above the sink. And because of the layout of the house where this window was, you could basically see the whole living area where I was sitting. I looked up at the window for a few seconds, but only saw darkness. I went back to what I was doing and began to think that it must have just been a branch or something. There were large trees behind the house, but the more I thought about it, the more unlikely it seemed. None of the trees were close enough to the house to brush the window that way, and it wouldn't have made a knock sound like the one I heard. In the middle of having this thought, I heard another knock around the corner at the window in the laundry room. The full weight of what was happening was finally coming into focus. But my mind was still looking for an explanation that didn't conclude that someone was outside circling the house, stalking my companion and I. I started to tell Spencer what I had heard from the living room. But as I was, another knock came from the window in the living room, the one right next to me. I didn't see who it was on the other side, and I didn't want to. I jumped up and ran into the bedroom and locked the door. I asked Spencer if he heard it too, and he said yes. We started debating what to do. All we had for weapons were a couple of knives, and we didn't know how many people were actually out there, or if they were armed. So going to confront them on our own was out of the question. During our discussion, the knocking sound moved from the window in the living room to the front door itself, and we were getting more and more freaked out. We briefly debated calling the police, but we were in the middle of nowhere, and it would take them forever to get out there to help us. Then Spencer remembered we had the landlord's number. He called him and began explaining the situation. And by this point, we hadn't heard a knock at the door for a couple of minutes or so, but I knew what that meant, and I was dreading it when it finally came. A knock at our bedroom window. The blinds were closed, so we couldn't see who it was, and they couldn't see us. But that didn't make me feel much better. Spencer told him someone was stalking the house, and he said he would be right out with a shotgun. We waited for another few minutes, anticipating another knock, but nothing happened until finally our landlord came to the door and announced himself. We asked him if he had seen anyone, and he said no, but that he saw a pickup truck speeding away as he approached the house. I asked if he had gotten a license plate or any other features that could help the police, but he said they had already been too far away for him to see anything. Spencer and I grabbed our flashlights and circled the house with him. There were small patches of snow on the ground from a weather system that had come through a few days earlier. And in the snow, we saw footprints indeed circling the house. And as far as we could tell, there was only one set. We debated calling the police, but we knew that they wouldn't be much help in tracking the guy down. The landlord said to call him again if the guy came back. And with that, we went back into the house, locked everything down, and tried to sleep, but we couldn't. The first thing that came to mind was other missionaries playing a prank on us. But if that was the case, then why didn't they reveal themselves or say gotcha or something like that at some point? Also, it was past curfew. Everyone was supposed to be home, and the closest missionaries to us were at least 20 minutes away. The other possibility was that it was some teenagers from the ward playing a prank, but that didn't seem likely either, especially afterwards because, again, they would have come back and started laughing at us, and there was only one set of footprints we found. If it was a prank, I feel like that would have been a group thing to do. After the fact, no one ever fessed up when we did some asking around. So, to this day, we still have no idea who was outside or why they chose to harass us. But the scariest thing to me wasn't the knocking or how the only thing separating us from him was a thin layer of glass, but the fact that I likely looked right at this guy when he first knocked on the window in the kitchen and didn't even know it. From that day forward, my sleep only got worse. Nothing worked, and my own personal issues did not improve either. I'm not sure I'll ever go back to that house. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more weekly horror. On screen now is the most recent upload and the most viewed story on the channel. Pick your next one carefully, and remember, some stories are better not listened to alone.